Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, so I wanted to talk about some short stories that I found recently, or just one really. And one that has a spooky kind of flavor to it because it is the month of October. Although I think the one that I'm talking about today, besides the title, which indicates a little bit of spookiness, the main body of the story isn't too spooky, or it's a different kind of terror or existential dread or something like that. So not actually too spooky. So I guess this is an oasis of normality in the month of October. And today's short story is all about sleep. I am referring to The Haunted Mind by Nathaniel Hawthorne, which was published in 1835. For those who don't know, and I have a feeling a lot of people know who Nathaniel Hawthorne is, as he is one of the more well-known classic American authors, and he's taught in high schools and middle schools around the country, at least in America. So internationally, people might not know too much about him. But he was an American author in the 1800s who wrote the Scarlet Letter, as well as a bunch of short stories and essays. So a lot of people consider him to be one of the early American authors, along with like Washington Irving and maybe Herman Melville, writing at a time when America was still a pretty young nation. And in addition to doing that, he was also pretty tight with in politics, with him receiving a consularship and just interacting with a bunch of presidents like Franklin Pierce and Abraham Lincoln, and even writing about the war when he was with Lincoln, which I think is pretty interesting. And I've talked about Hawthorne on this channel before, having read The Scarlet Letter, but not talking about it here. And also one of the first short stories, really the reason I created Short Story Tuesday, was to read Dr. Heidegger's Experiment, about a group of people who participate in an experiment where they become younger thanks to the Fountain of Youth, which was a pretty good short story. And I recommend that you go check out that video if you have not done so already. But without further ado, let's talk about The Haunted Mind. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So The Haunted Mind is a bit unusual in that it's told through second-person narration, focusing on you, rather than first-person narration, which does I or me, or third-person narration, which focuses on a specific character, rather than you or anything like that. But Hawthorne says that you wake up in the middle of the night after dreaming, and you're in that space where there's like the dreams are either still in reality, or you say goodbye to those dreams, or something like that. It's a bit of a magical space, but eventually you come to consciousness, where you're more aware of the surroundings, how cold it is given that it's winter, and you can hear the church bells late at night, which suggests it's around 2 or 3 o'clock. You can see the snow outside and even some of the stars as you look out the window. You think about how it would be nice to live a life in bed, the ecstasy of never having to do anything, which is an interesting way to phrase it from Hawthorne. But then you also think about the dead and how they do nothing as well, and there would be no difference between you and the dead, and maybe that persuades you not to want to live that kind of life. At the same time, you begin having these feelings of shame, these visits from failure and disappointment, and realizing the things that make you feel not so great about life. And as you're sort of dozing off, thinking about all this, you start upright. You know, how people like bolt awake and are like, I don't want to be thinking about that sort of thing anymore. And you deal with that sort of that dread that you're feeling with before, again, you start to fall asleep and you enter that area between life and dreams where you're still alive, but you're also almost dead if you were to stay like this forever. But you become aware that you're in a different world. And that's where the story ends. In terms of analysis, Hawthorne really focuses on one idea in this pretty short story, and that is sleeping and dreaming, focusing on what we do at night. Hawthorne notes that life stress seems to go away in the time of dreaming, apart from the terrors that you feel and the dread of the past or something like that, and sort of recognizing your failures. Life stress, like you're at a point where you don't have to deal with what goes on during the day. Like if you wake up for that brief hour after you've fallen asleep for some time, you can look outside and see the star and the snow and just absorb life. Hawthorne specifically notes that like Father Time doesn't aid you during this period. It's sort of like a timelessness where you're just left to think about what's been going on recently and really getting the rest that you kind of need at this time. It's a very beautiful kind of description on Hawthorne's part. And waking at the midnight hour, as I just mentioned, that's an hour of magic right there. That you can't really get from any other moment during the day because you're so busy and you're focusing on errands or making dinner or making breakfast or handling your personal affairs, just going about doing a bunch of variety of things. However, this not all of this is great. As I mentioned before, like there are these thoughts of failing and shame that we so often have. You see this described, on the internet and many other places, how you go to sleep at night and your brain's awake thinking about all the things that went wrong or that are embarrassing or cringy, and your mind is racing towards that. And as you briefly fall asleep, you might even start dreaming of some of that and how uncomfortable it has made you. And it's not a good feeling because again, like the dreaming is supposed to be a place of peace and relaxation, and that's not exactly very relaxing. There's a very interesting quote that I would like to read to you from this. In an hour like this, when the mind has a passive sensibility but no active strength, when the imagination is a mirror imparting vividness to all ideas without the power of selecting or controlling them, then pray that your griefs may slumber and the brotherhood of remorse may not break their chain. It is too late. A funeral train comes gliding by your bed, in which possession and feeling assume bodily shapes, and things of the mind become dim specters to the eye. There is your earliest sorrow, a pale young mourner wearing a sister's likeness to first love, sadly beautiful, with a hollowed sweetness in her melancholy features, and grace in the flow of her sable robe. And that's an interesting quote because, again, he's talking about the regrets and the griefs that we feel, and then the parade of the funeral procession of your mind, of everything that you've done wrong and that you might not be happy about. It just comes parading out, and that's really paired with the peace and calm we feel with sleep. So there's a duality there, and it's very fascinating that Hawthorne describes it this way, and that we continue to describe it this way. Like he's really one of the first people to put that pen to paper, as you can see here. And then like Hawthorne also describes this as like another dimension. Like we're not quite in our world. We seem to be entering into a new one as we enter into the dream world. Something that Neil Gaiman would further elaborate on in future Sandman stories. So I don't think he was inspired by Hawthorne here, but again, you can see how the Sandman is built upon some of the ideas that people have been throwing around for quite some time. And he also describes this as near death. He frequently likens this to death because to be dead is to be sort of in a permanent state of slumber, whereas here Hawthorne describes sleeping as a temporary death, like a temporary exit of consciousness. Very, very interesting way to describe sleeping, and to also make us worried, like that we're so close to dying, that we're so close to passing on beyond this mortal form, but not quite. Another interesting element of this story is the second person narration. Rather than using I terms or ascribing this to an unnamed narrator, Hawthorne includes the reader in the story by focusing on you, the person he's referring to. So he's included us as individuals in the story that he's telling about sleep, making it more relatable in a number of ways. It really adds to the wonder of learning more about sleep, because you're like, oh yeah, I can relate to this. But it also adds to the horror of the story, the small bit of horror of realizing your greatest fears and the terrors and the uncertainty of what you might find in your dreams, and understanding that this is relatable, a shared human experience. You're not alone in this, but also isn't it terrifying that how everyone kind of goes through this, that maybe this is an unstoppable force of what happens when we sleep. Overall, I would say this is kind of philosophical in nature. Like, because of the way he writes in this story, Hawthorne seems to be writing a philosophical treatise. Like, he's trying to say something about the nature of reality or the nature of human beings through this story because of the way that he is writing this, or even something psychological. Like this is way before like psychology had become an established field of research, but maybe he's trying to talk about the human brain here and say what happens when we sleep. Maybe that's not fully his intention, but that's the way the story comes off. And I do have to add like the real world kind of equations here, like the real world equivalent of him sort of making a meme here, or like an early Twitter post. Because on Twitter I see like posts all the time like, isn't this aspect of sleeping kind of weird or kind of interesting, and people like making memes about this sort of thing. And this like this short story would be the meme equivalent of sort of talking about a shared human experience that we can all kind of bond over. And I just think that's fascinating how the way we talk about this has changed, how stories like this, or like this sort of like shared human experience of talking about something that affects us all, has moved online and something more people can see and say, hey, yeah, I definitely feel something like that. It's kind of weird to equate Hawthorne to Twitter or something like that, to a Twitter post. And I'm not doing that to denigrate it at all. I'm just saying that like something you find in this short story hundreds of years ago is something that, you know, we see in different forms now. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Haunted Mind by Nathaniel Hawthorne. A really good short story, probably one of the better ones that I've read recently. A really enjoyable experience for me, and I'm definitely going to recommend it to you out there, and I'll put a link to it in the description so that you can find it and read it. Let me know what your thoughts are about it. Let's have a discussion in the comments below. Otherwise, I should also say that this kind of reminds me of Jorge Luis Borges's To Sleep or something like that, a poem that I read within the past year, where he talks about the beauty and the enjoyment of sleep. It seems like a lot of writers frequently comment on the enjoyment of sleep and being able to dream and whatnot. So something notable to talk about if you're ever talking about something in literature like that. But other than that, if you read this before, you simply want to comment on something I said, or don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'm getting mixed up here, but don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find this story if they want to. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your dreamy and weird travels. Farewell.